Coin traders, what to do? How's it going? Thanks for joining me. Looking at Internet Computer ICP, not to be confused with the insane clown posse. So right now, looking pretty much right at the 540 line, and we do have CPI numbers coming out here shortly in the morning. So we are going to expect some sort of impact on the markets, especially if it is in favor of the bulls or obviously in favor of the bears. We'll probably see a little bit more of a pullback, but likely that is one of the more bearish things that we're going to end up seeing. But so overall, a lot to talk about today with this ICP Internet Computer chart. So as always, if you are new to the show, huge welcome. Go ahead and hit that subscribe and notification bell so you can stay updated on future updates like this. Also, don't forget to hit that like button as well if you do enjoy this type of content. Now, I actually kind of wanted to start off on some of the shorter time frame charts, so I guess we can start it on the 4-hour first. And one of the things we noticed that, especially after this nice distribution phase, which is the inverse of an accumulation phase, and this is kind of, for example, like what we ended up seeing on the last Bitcoin climax back in the spring of 2021, where we did have our high and then finally ended up breaking some of the lows and then ultimately ended up scaling back. But we know that right now there's a heavy correlation between the rest of the crypto space, and that even if we go ahead and look over at Bitcoin, for example, we can talk about just how we've started to see a little bit of decrease in tapering off. So let's pull up the volume, for example, and start to talk about how overall we have seen the hype of the move and then a little bit more of that distribution phase. But this sell-off isn't necessarily that strong because we don't really have that much volume coming in on these price pullbacks. But one of the things that we do have on a Bitcoin, for example, that is significant is getting stuck up with the inability to recover above these exponential moving averages. So that does start to favor a little bit more of that bearish activity. And we could be looking at still a little bit more slippage to the downside on Bitcoin as well. But realistically, with so many supports to the downside and such minimal volume that we have seen for the bears, I do anticipate some of these supports to actually stabilize and hold up, provide a little bit more of that longer support to see prices going to the upside. So why are we talking about Bitcoin? Well, let's actually flip over to ICP Internet Computer because as we know, all these markets are correlated. And if we do start to see a little bit more strength out of Internet Computer, be a little bit more slippage out of Bitcoin, that is going to be a lot more of a red flag. Because typically in the event of news-driven catalysts and things like that, that's very short-lived, and then we do end up resuming correlation with the rest of the crypto space. So that's always why we do maintain that sight picture of what's going on in the broader crypto markets. Now, while we got volume pulling up, let's look at that too. So we already had our climax of volume. So typically what we want to see in strong bearish moves is a pullback with increasing a bearish volume that does signal a lot of strength in the downside pullback. But when we see our peak volume coming in, typically that does signal a short-term top. But that also means that we're not going to experience a consistent, strong, growing pressure to the downside, and that likely we do get selling exhaustion, which does lead the bulls to defending some of the lower supports, which is pretty much what we're experiencing right now. So for example, if we do flip over to the 2-day and we do look at the exponential moving averages that we've been eyeing at as support, one of the things we have talked about on the channel before regarding these exponential moving averages, especially on this 2-day, is that if we zoom out, prices on pretty much the history of Internet Computer have always been under specifically the 50-period EMA on this 2-day chart. So as you can see, running down this whole time, prices maintained price action below that. And so now the fact that we're actually starting to see prices rally above it, pull back, and actually backtest and confirm this 2-day EMA as that support level with now that follow through to the upside. So that's typically what we wanted to see when we talk about showing longer term strength to the upside. But unfortunately, right now on this 2-day chart, we're not looking at the most bullish setup in the sense that we have a ginormous bearish candle to the downside, and it's taken 3 candles so far. And granted, we did just start the current 2-day candle, and we have just shy of 2 days left, so about a day and 19 hours left on that. But if you look at big upper wick on this candle, and if we just look at the size of the bodies with respect to the body of the bearish candle that closed, we know that there's not a lot of rebounding strength immediately, which is still okay. That doesn't confirm anything just yet. But if we don't see a lot more price action on this current candle, that is going to start to favor a lot more bearish action because it's taken 3 candles just to form more or less a bear flag. And likely we're going to start to see a little bit more increased selling pressure again. So now if we talk about the selling pressure with regard to volume on this 2-day, you can see that the climax so far for bearish volume did come in right around the top, which is expected. But if we look at the magnitude of body for this candle, you can see that it's nothing in comparison to this bearish candle that closed when we talk about less bearish volume. So less support from the bulls is pretty much what allowed the size of this candle to close that much. Because typically when we talk about candles having this size of body, we typically expect a big size volume bar to come in just because it needs that much volume to eat up the order book and actually push prices down in that regard. But so if we actually zoom out just a little bit and want to talk about some upside targets, then let's go ahead and draw a closing level target coming in just above 560 at 561. So the reason this is significant because we can see nice close, looking at nice support for the price, closing resistance with all these big upper wicks, looking extremely far left as well, big resistance point before the all-time lows right now. We go ahead and pull up some technicals on this 2-day, looking at the RSI on top first. So after pulling back from overbought levels, that's a good sign. And also right now, if we draw a support line right around the 50 line, you can see that we are starting to find support for this RSI. Yet also that was the point that we found more or less resistance for on this overall trend. So the 50 line's been pretty much a good zone for the prices of, or excuse me, the RSI levels to actually get stuck up at. So the fact that we are now finding it as support, meanwhile kicking off that 50 period EMA is a little bit more of that supportive signal. But that doesn't mean that we're going to now necessarily run to see new higher highs in price. And although I am expecting a little bit more gradual, steady growth to the upside, I don't necessarily think that, personally, just in my opinion, that the rest of the bear market has been over. And we do still have a lot of confirmations and a lot of things left in order to actually prove that and confirm that. So if we look at the next oscillator, which is the stochastic RSI, you can see that we have formed a little bit more of that bullish cross right now. So we are seeing that being a nice guide to help push prices and the price action for momentum back to the upside. Any previous bullish cross has been pretty significant for the bulls in terms of having several candles drawn out that actually leads to a little bit more of that follow through price action. But one thing notable too is that if we actually look at the MACD now, we've already had our bearish cross. So we're starting to see the MACD below the signal line with bars on the histogram below the zero line as well. So we are going to have that to contend with, along with a little bit more upside resistance at this point. So flipping over, looking at some shorter time frame charts right now, looking at the 4-hour first specifically. So we are seeing a lot of nice downside wicks on these candles. So we can see nice lower shadows. And especially this comes after having a rising wedge, which we ultimately expect, especially on a pullback, to have a little bit more of a bearish sell-off. So having a bullish confirmation with bullish follow-through is exactly the type of sign that we need to see. So after pulling back, maintaining this nice support on top of the previous level of resistance, price for that coming in at 530, and then now showing a lot more promise for a little bit more followed up through. Resistance points up overhead, we are going to be looking at 544.8 though. So we can look left, big points of support, and then also support on this initial move before flushing it. So we are going to be looking at that as being a point of resistance. So price gain for that would only be about less than 1%. So about 4 cents to the upsides where we're going to find the first level of resistance at. Anything up overhead after that, I would likely anticipate coming in at about 565. As indicated by the ability of prices to reach above and close on top of that level. And then even coming back from this high as well, we did have a resistance point as well that got rejected from the bulls. So like we said, still going to be a lot of resistance up overhead. So unless we get a lot of bullish news and a big turnaround for the rest of the crypto space, I would anticipate a struggle up overhead, pretty much up through about, at most, about the 530 or the 580 level, excuse me. So about a 7% gain is pretty much the max that I would anticipate right now in the short term, having the bulls actually get to. So from that point, bulls would need to change the trend, actually consolidate along the 550 to 560 level, and then find enough strength once again to blow through all this previous level of resistance. Because if we actually want to zoom out here and talk about the VPVR or volume profile of visible range, then we can see just how much resistance there is going to be up overhead based on previous trade volumes. So if we look right here, big point of mass is going to be coming in right about 585, as you can see. So from where current prices are, all we have next is a big increasing level of mass for volume. So that does mean a lot of resistance and selling pressure is expected to come in between now and the current trend high, which does sit just above a 5.25 at about, or 6.25, excuse me, at 627.9. To the downside for support, though, is actually pretty nice because if we do look on VPVR, a little bit more point of mass from about 520 down to the $5 psychological level. So I would expect, even if we do get rejection, to see prices pulling back and then even at that point, finding maybe even a little bit more of a double bottom. if we do in fact bounce off of that $5 psychological level. So overall, I do think we could see a little bit potential for some upside movement, but because of all the resistance points up overhead, I think it would actually take a lot in the near term anyway to see a little bit higher highs for the overall price and continue to see this rally that ultimately ends up breaking above 627. And so especially if we do get bearish news out of CPI numbers in the morning, then that's obviously going to have a huge bearish impact and probably would start to see a lot more of the sell-off accelerating across the rest of the crypto space. But of course, as always, let me know your thoughts, predictions, disagreements, all that down below in the comments sections. Do love getting back to each and every one of you. That is going to wrap up the video for now, though, so hope you all enjoyed. If you did, once again, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you haven't done so just yet. Hope everyone's staying safe, take care, and I will catch you back in the next video.